The summer sun beat down on Fenway Park as Staff Sergeant James Cooper made his way through the crowded stadium entrance. It was his first baseball game since returning from Afghanistan 6 months ago, and the familiar smell of hot dogs, popcorn, and fresh cut grass brought back memories of simpler times. His sister Rachel had given him these tickets as a welcome home gift, insisting that he needed to start enjoying civilian life again. Cooper was wearing simple clothes, a plain blue t-shirt, cargo shorts, and his favorite worn-out baseball cap. Nothing about his appearance screamed military, except maybe his straight posture and the alert way his eyes scanned his surroundings. Old habits died hard, even at a baseball game. Finding his seat in section 134, row 12, Cooper settled in for the game. He was early, just as his military training had ingrained in him. Better to be 3 hours early than 3 minutes late, his first sergeant used to say. The stadium was slowly filling up as other fans arrived, families with excited kids, couples on dates, and groups of friends ready for a good time. A vendor walked by, and Cooper bought himself a cold beer and a hot dog. It was a luxury he hadn't enjoyed in a long time. In Afghanistan, the days were filled with patrols, training local forces, and always being ready for anything. Here, you could just sit back and watch 9 innings of America's favorite pastime. The national anthem played, and Cooper stood at attention, his right hand over his heart. Some habits weren't meant to be broken. As the song ended and people started sitting down, he noticed a commotion several rows behind him. A group of bikers had arrived, and they weren't being quiet about it. There were 5 of them, all wearing leather vests with patches that read Road Raiders MC. They were pushing their way through the row, not caring who they bumped into or stepped on. Cooper watched as they made an elderly man almost spill his drink, and none of them even bothered to apologize. The game started, and Cooper tried to focus on the action on the field. The Red Sox were playing the Yankees, a classic rivalry that usually guaranteed excitement. By the 3rd inning, the score was tied 2-2, and the crowd was getting into it. But the noise from the bikers kept getting louder. They had clearly been drinking before they arrived, and they kept ordering more beers. Their loud voices carried through the section as they told crude jokes and made rude comments about other fans. Cooper noticed several families with children looking uncomfortable, and a few people had already moved to different seats. The stadium staff seemed hesitant to approach them. One young usher had tried to ask them to keep it down, but they had just laughed at him and made threatening gestures until he backed away. Cooper knew that type. Bullies who thought their strength came from intimidating others. As the 4th inning started, Cooper could feel the tension in their section growing. The bikers were getting rowdier, and people were getting more annoyed. A foul ball came their way, and instead of letting a kid nearby catch it, one of the bikers aggressively pushed forward and grabbed it, then threw it back onto the field while laughing. Cooper sighed quietly. He hadn't wanted any trouble today. All he'd wanted was to enjoy a peaceful baseball game, eat a hot dog, drink a beer, and pretend for a few hours that he was just a regular guy watching a regular game, but he could see where this was heading. Getting into fights wasn't his style. In the Army, they trained him extensively in conflict de-escalation. The best fight is the one you never have to fight, his combat instructor used to say. But they'd also trained him to be ready when avoiding conflict wasn't an option. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the field, when Cooper heard heavy footsteps coming down his row. The bikers were on the move again, and this time they were heading his way. He took a slow sip of his beer and kept his eyes on the game, but his body was already tensing up, preparing for what might come next. Sometimes trouble found you, no matter how hard you tried to avoid it. The group of bikers made their way down Cooper's row, bumping into people's knees and spilling drinks along the way. Their leader, a huge man with a thick beard and arms covered in tattoos, walked in front. The patches on his vest identified him as Tank, and he lived up to the nickname. He must have weighed at least 280 pounds, most of it muscle hidden under a layer of beer belly. Cooper kept his eyes on the game, but he could smell the alcohol on them as they got closer. He had dealt with enough drunk people during his time as a military police officer to know that the worst thing you could do was make eye contact too early. It was like dealing with angry dogs. Sometimes looking at them was all it took to start a fight. Tank stopped right next to Cooper's seat, swaying slightly. He was holding a fresh beer, and Cooper knew what was coming even before it happened. Tank accidentally tilted his cup, spilling cold beer all over Cooper's shoulder and arm. Oops! Tank said with a nasty grin, his voice dripping with fake innocence. His friends laughed loudly behind him, enjoying the show. Guess you should pick a different seat, buddy. Cooper slowly turned his head and looked up at Tank. His voice was calm and polite when he spoke. No problem. Accidents happen. But maybe you could be a bit more careful walking through here. There are families trying to watch the game. Tank's grin disappeared, replaced by an angry scowl. He didn't like Cooper's tone. Bullies never did when someone spoke to them with confidence instead of fear. You trying to tell me what to do, boy? The other bikers spread out slightly, creating a half circle around Cooper's seat. Their body language made their intentions clear. They were looking for trouble, and they thought they'd found an easy target. They didn't know that Cooper had spent years training soldiers in hand-to-hand combat, or that he'd earned his black belt in 3 different martial arts. Not at all, Cooper replied, still keeping his voice friendly. Just suggesting we all try to enjoy the game together. Here, let me move my legs so you can pass. He pulled his knees to the side, giving them plenty of room to walk by. Instead of moving past, Tank deliberately bumped against Cooper's legs, then acted surprised when he met resistance. What's this? You got a problem moving your legs, tough guy? People nearby were starting to notice the confrontation. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others looked away, not wanting to get involved. A few rows down, an usher was speaking into his radio, probably calling for backup. My legs are already moved, Cooper said patiently. You got plenty of room to walk by. Why don't we all just watch the game? Looks like Martinez is up to bat. He's been hitting well today. One of Tank's friends, a skinny guy with a snake tattoo on his neck, laughed sharply. Hey Tank, I think this guy's trying to ignore you. Maybe he needs a lesson in respect. Cooper noticed that the skinny biker had his hand in his pocket, probably holding a knife or brass knuckles. These weren't just rowdy drunks. They were looking for a fight, and they came prepared for one. His mind automatically started cataloging possible threats and escape routes, just like he'd done thousands of times on patrol. Tank leaned down, putting his face close to Cooper's. His breath smelled like cheap beer and cigarettes. You know what? I don't like your attitude. This is our section now. Maybe you should find somewhere else to sit. The threat was clear, but Cooper didn't move. He'd faced down Taliban fighters and survived firefights in Kandahar. A group of drunk bikers didn't scare him. Still, he kept his voice level and professional. I bought this ticket fair and square, just like you did. There's room for all of us here if we just respect each other's space. Tank's face turned red with anger. Nobody talked back to him like this, especially not in front of his crew. He straightened up and looked at his friends, nodding slightly. The message was clear. This peaceful approach wasn't working. It was time for Plan B. The next 2 innings were a test of Cooper's patience. Tank and his gang had found seats right behind him, and they were doing everything they could to make him lose his cool. They kicked his seat, threw peanut shells at his head, and made loud comments about how the military was full of one-up tough guys who couldn't handle real action. Cooper ignored them and focused on the game, but he was fully aware of everything happening around him. His military training had taught him to maintain situational awareness at all times. He noticed when 2 of the bikers left and came back with more beers, even though the vendors had stopped serving alcohol after the 7th inning. He saw how they were making other fans uncomfortable, causing several families to move to different sections. Hey, soldier boy, Tank called out, his words slightly slurred. How come you're sitting here all alone? No friends brave enough to hang out with you. His gang laughed loudly at this, spilling more beer as they rocked in their seats. Cooper took a slow breath. In Afghanistan, he'd learned that patience was often the best weapon. He'd once spent 18 hours in a hiding spot, waiting for the right moment to evacuate a wounded civilian. This was no different. Just another exercise in self-control. A foul ball flew into their section, and one of the bikers caught it. Instead of keeping it or giving it to one of the kids nearby, he threw it hard at the back of Cooper's head. Cooper's reflexes kicked in automatically, and he caught the ball without even turning around. The crowd around them went quiet. Nice catch, Cooper said calmly, turning to hand the ball back. But maybe aim for the field next time? His voice was friendly, but his eyes were sharp and alert. The biker who threw the ball actually took a step back, suddenly unsure of himself. Tank didn't like this at all. He stood up, towering over the seats. You think you're some kind of tough guy, huh? Making my boy look bad? He cracked his knuckles loudly, trying to look intimidating. Nobody's trying to make anyone look bad, Cooper replied. We're all here to watch baseball. Look. Martinez just hit a double. He pointed to the field, where the crowd was cheering for a great play. The skinny biker with the snake tattoo leaned forward. Hey Tank, I think this military boy is disrespecting us. Maybe we should teach him how we handle disrespect. His hand was still in his pocket, playing with whatever weapon he had hidden there. Cooper noticed more people filming with their phones now. An older man a few rows back was talking urgently with a security guard, pointing at the bikers. But stadium security seemed hesitant to approach. They were probably waiting for backup before dealing with 5 angry bikers. You know what really bugs me about you military types? Tank said loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. You walk around like you're better than everyone else. Like putting on a uniform makes you special. He took another drink from his beer, spilling some down his chin. But I bet you've never been in a real fight in your life. Cooper had to hold back a smile at that. He'd been in more real fights than he cared to remember. But none of them had been by choice, and none of them had been for show. In the army, they'd fought when they had to protect themselves and others. Everything else was just ego. A young boy in the row in front of them turned around to watch the confrontation. He was wearing a Red Sox cap and couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His father was trying to get him to turn back around, to ignore the trouble brewing behind them. Looking at that kid, Cooper made a decision. If this was going to turn ugly, and it seemed like it would, he needed to make sure it happened somewhere else. Away from the families, away from the children. He started thinking about how to make that happen, running through scenarios in his head like his combat instructors had taught him. The 7th inning stretch was coming up. That would be his chance to change the situation. But first, he had to survive 10 more minutes of the bikers' increasingly aggressive behavior. The 7th inning stretch had just ended when things took a dangerous turn. Tank and his gang had grown frustrated with Cooper's calm responses to their harassment. They needed a new target, and they found one in the family sitting in front of Cooper, the father, mother, and their young son in the Red Sox cap. Hey kid, Tank called out, his voice mean and mocking. That's a pretty nice hat you got there. Bet it would look better on me. The boy shrunk down in his seat, pressing closer to his father, who put a protective arm around him. Cooper watched as the father, a man in his early 40s wearing glasses and a business casual shirt, tried to handle the situation. Please leave my family alone, the father said, his voice shaking slightly but determined. We don't want any trouble. Well, that's too bad, Snake Tattoo replied with a nasty laugh. Because trouble wants you. He stood up and accidentally kicked the back of the mother's seat hard enough to make her spill her drink on herself. The mother gasped as the cold liquid soaked her clothes. The young boy started crying, and the father stood up, his face red with anger. That's enough. I'm getting security. Tank grabbed his half-full beer cup and raised it threateningly. Sit down, tough guy, or you'll be wearing this next. His friends laughed and raised their cups too, ready to drench the family. That was the moment Cooper decided enough was enough. He'd been trained to protect civilians, and he wasn't about to watch a family get assaulted by drunk bullies at a baseball game. He stood up smoothly, turning to face Tank and his crew while positioning himself between them and the family. The game's not over yet, Cooper said calmly, but his voice had a new edge to it, the kind of tone that combat veterans recognize instantly. Why don't you all sit down and watch the rest of it? Tank's face turned dark with rage. No one had stood up to him all day, and he wasn't about to let it happen now. He threw his beer cup at Cooper's face, but Cooper's reflexes were too quick. He dodged the beer while simultaneously pushing the family toward the aisle, out of the line of fire. Get him! Tank roared, and his gang moved all at once. Snake Tattoo reached for his pocket, but Cooper was already moving. Years of combat training had taught him how to handle multiple attackers, and he knew the first rule: never let them surround you. Cooper stepped into the row behind him, forcing the bikers to come at him in a line instead of all at once. Tank charged forward first, throwing a wild punch that Cooper easily avoided. The big man's momentum carried him forward, and Cooper used it against him, redirecting Tank's charge into an empty seat with a simple shoulder move. Snake Tattoo came next, finally pulling what Cooper had suspected, a set of brass knuckles, from his pocket. But before he could use them, Cooper had already closed the distance. In one smooth motion, he trapped Snake Tattoo's armed hand and applied pressure to a nerve point in the wrist, making him drop the weapon with a yelp of pain. The other three bikers hesitated, suddenly realizing this wasn't going to be the easy fight they'd expected. Cooper stood ready, his stance balanced and his eyes alert, moving slightly to keep all of them in his field of vision. His breathing was calm and controlled. This wasn't his first fight, and it showed. Stadium security was finally arriving, pushing through the crowd with their yellow jackets visible. But they were still rows away, and Tank was already getting back up, his face red with rage and embarrassment. The other bikers spread out, trying to trap Cooper in the row. The young boy and his family had made it safely to the aisle, where other fans were helping them move away from the conflict. Several phones were recording the scene, their owners knowing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Cooper took a deep breath, centering himself. The real fight was about to begin. What happened next would later become a viral video watched by millions. Tank charged at Cooper again, this time more carefully, throwing a combination of punches that showed he had some boxing experience. But Cooper wasn't there to trade punches. He had been trained to end fights quickly and efficiently. As Tank threw a heavy right hook, Cooper stepped inside his guard, using a simple military combat move that had saved his life more than once in Afghanistan. In one smooth motion, he redirected Tank's momentum, swept his front leg, and sent the bigger man sprawling face first into the seats. Before Tank could recover, Cooper had his arm locked behind his back in a hold that any police officer would recognize. "Stay down," Cooper said quietly, applying just enough pressure to make Tank grunt in pain. "I don't want to hurt you." The other bikers didn't know what to do. They had expected an easy fight against one man, but their leader was already down and controlled. Snake Tattoo, still nursing his injured wrist, backed away slightly. His brass knuckles lay forgotten under a seat. Two of the remaining bikers tried to rush Cooper from different directions, thinking they could overwhelm him. Cooper kept control of Tank with one hand while using his free arm to block a wild punch from the first attacker. Years of training kicked in automatically. Block, move, redirect. The biker's own punch carried him forward, and Cooper helped him along, sending him stumbling into his friend. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. The last biker, a younger guy who had been quiet most of the day, pulled out a small pocket knife. The crowd gasped, and several people screamed. But Cooper had dealt with armed opponents before, and a drunk biker with a pocket knife was nothing compared to the threats he faced overseas. "You really don't want to do that," Cooper said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the now silent section. "Adding armed assault to your charges won't help anyone." The young biker looked at his knife, then at his friends, scattered around the seats. Tank was still pinned, groaning in pain. Snake Tattoo was backing away toward the aisle. The other two were just starting to untangle themselves. The knife clattered to the ground, and the young biker raised his hands in surrender. Stadium security finally arrived, 5 officers pushing through the crowd with their radios crackling. They found Cooper still holding Tank in the control position, looking as calm as if he was watching practice drills back at the base. The other bikers were scattered around him, none wanting to be the next one to test the soldier's skills. "Sir," the lead security officer said to Cooper, "we can take it from here." 2 police officers were right behind them, their badges glinting in the stadium lights. Cooper nodded and carefully released Tank, making sure the security team had control before letting go completely. As soon as he was free, Tank tried to lunge at Cooper again, but the security officers quickly restrained him. It took 3 of them to get handcuffs on the angry biker. The crowd in their section, which had been filming everything on their phones, burst into applause. The young boy who had been harassed earlier was looking at Cooper with wide, admiring eyes. His father gave Cooper a grateful nod. One of the police officers, after checking Cooper's military ID, pulled him aside. "Staff Sergeant, that was some impressive work. Where did you learn those moves?" Cooper straightened his shirt, which had barely been wrinkled in the fight. "Army combat training, sir. We're taught to control situations with minimal force. No one needed to get seriously hurt today." He looked around at the scattered bikers, now being led away by security and police. Tank was still struggling and cursing, while Snake Tattoo was trying to explain that his brass knuckles were just for show. The young biker with the knife was already confessing everything to a police officer, looking like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment. The entire fight had lasted less than 2 minutes, but it would be talked about at Fenway Park for years to come. The next 30 minutes were busy as police officers took statements from witnesses. Everyone in the section wanted to tell their version of what happened. Phones were passed around, showing videos of the fight from different angles. The stadium security team had their hands full keeping curious fans from other sections from crowding in to see what had happened. Cooper sat calmly in his seat, giving his statement to a police sergeant named Martinez. The officer, a former Marine himself, nodded with understanding as Cooper explained how he had tried to de-escalate the situation before being forced to act. "You did good, Staff Sergeant," Martinez said, finishing his notes. "These guys have been causing trouble at different places around the city. We've had reports from 3 other venues about them harassing families, but nobody stood up to them before. They usually intimidate people into staying quiet." The family Cooper had protected came back to thank him. The father, who introduced himself as David Chen, couldn't stop shaking Cooper's hand. "I've never seen anything like that," Mr. Chen said, his voice full of gratitude. "When that big guy threatened my son, I felt so helpless. Thank you for stepping in." Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes as she hugged Cooper. "You're a hero," she said simply. Their son, Tommy, looked up at Cooper with pure admiration. He was clutching his Red Sox cap tightly, as if afraid Tank might come back for it. "Can you teach me how to do that?" Tommy asked eagerly. "Those moves were amazing." Cooper smiled kindly at the boy. "The best move is learning how to avoid fights in the first place," he explained. "But standing up for others who need help, that's always the right thing to do." A stadium manager in a suit and tie hurried down to their section. He looked worried about potential lawsuits or bad publicity, but relaxed visibly when he saw how calm everything was. After talking with the police and security team, he approached Cooper. "Staff Sergeant Cooper, on behalf of the Red Sox organization, I want to apologize for what happened today," the manager said formally. "Please, let me upgrade you to our premium seats behind home plate for the rest of the game." Cooper politely declined the offer. "Thank you, but I'm happy right here," he said. "Though if you could bring some napkins for the spilled drinks, that would be great." His simple response made several nearby fans smile. After everything that had happened, he just wanted to watch the rest of the game. The stadium staff went above and beyond, bringing not just napkins but fresh drinks and free snacks for everyone in the nearby rows. The cleaning crew quickly cleared away the scattered peanut shells and empty cups left by the bikers. From the police discussion nearby, Cooper learned more about the Road Raiders. They had been banned from 2 other sports venues for similar behavior, but no one had been able to identify them clearly before. Thanks to all the phone videos today, they wouldn't be causing trouble at any more games. News of what happened spread quickly through the stadium. Fans walking past their section would slow down and point, trying to spot the soldier who took down the bikers. Some people asked to take pictures with Cooper, but he politely declined, saying he didn't want to block anyone's view of the game. The young boy, Tommy, had moved with his family to sit in the row right next to Cooper. Every few minutes, he would look over at Cooper with amazement, as if making sure the soldier was still there. His father had bought him a new baseball and asked Cooper to sign it. Cooper wrote a simple message: "Stand up for what's right, SSG Cooper." As the 8th inning began, things finally started to settle down. The police had finished their reports, the curious onlookers returned to their seats, and the game resumed its normal pace. Cooper sat back, finally able to enjoy the baseball game he'd come to watch in the first place. But this wouldn't be the end of the story. Not by a long shot. By the next morning, videos of the incident had spread all over social media. Someone had edited together footage from different angles, showing how Cooper had handled the situation from start to finish. The video, titled "Bikers Mess with the Wrong Soldier at Baseball Game," already had millions of views. Local news stations picked up the story. The morning news showed clips of the confrontation, praising Cooper's restraint and skill. Reporters tried to contact him for interviews, but Cooper had already returned to his regular routine at Fort Devens, where he trained new recruits in combat techniques. His commanding officer, Captain Sarah Reynolds, called him into her office early that morning. Cooper stood at attention, expecting some criticism for getting involved in a public incident. Instead, she smiled and turned her computer monitor around to show him the viral video. "At ease, Staff Sergeant," she said warmly. "Looks like you've become quite famous." The brass upstairs is very happy with how you handled this situation. You showed exactly the kind of judgment and restraint we try to teach our soldiers. Cooper relaxed slightly but remained professional. Just did what my training taught me, ma'am. Tried to avoid the fight until they threatened civilians. Meanwhile, at the Boston Police Department, the 5 bikers were facing serious charges. Tank, whose real name was Gerald Morrison, had a long record of similar incidents. The brass knuckles and knife found at the scene added weapons charges to their list of problems. The Road Raiders Motorcycle Club held an emergency meeting that morning. They voted unanimously to kick out Tank and his friends, not wanting their club associated with bullying families at baseball games. They released a public statement apologizing for the incident and emphasizing that it didn't represent their values. Back at Fenway Park, the stadium staff was busy dealing with the aftermath. The incident had actually brought some positive attention to their security procedures. The videos showed how quickly their team had responded once the situation turned physical. They decided to use the incident as a training example for their security staff. Tommy Chen, the young boy Cooper had protected, brought the signed baseball to show and tell at his school. His teacher used it as an opportunity to talk about standing up to bullies the right way, first trying to avoid fights, then getting help from adults, and only using force as a last resort to protect others. Local veterans groups praised Cooper's actions, pointing out how his behavior represented the best of military training. Several combat training schools in the Boston area reported increased interest from people wanting to learn self-defense, specifically asking about the techniques Cooper had used. The most surprising reaction came from Snake Tattoo, whose real name was Mike Peterson. After being released on bail, he wrote a long post on social media admitting he was wrong. He described how Cooper's calm professionalism, even while taking down 5 attackers, had made him rethink his life choices. "I always thought being tough meant making other people afraid," he wrote. "But that soldier showed me what real toughness looks like. It's about protecting others and staying calm under pressure, not about bullying people." Cooper's sister Rachel, who had given him the baseball tickets, couldn't stop laughing when she called him. "Only you could go to a baseball game and end up becoming a viral sensation," she teased. "Though I notice you still managed to watch the whole game afterward." Of course, Cooper replied with a small smile. It was a good game. The Red Sox won 6-4. The incident had one more unexpected effect. The Army's recruiting office in Boston reported a surge of interest from young people wanting to know more about military service. The recruiters had to explain that not every soldier learned to fight like Cooper. He was a specially trained combat instructor, but they were happy to talk about the military's values of protecting others and serving with honor. By the end of that day, Cooper's story had reached military bases across the country. Drill sergeants were already using it as an example in their training classes, showing how proper combat training wasn't about looking tough or starting fights. It was about protecting others and staying in control of yourself. 1 month after the incident at Fenway Park, Cooper sat in the same stadium again. This time, he wasn't just another fan in the crowd. The Red Sox had invited him to throw out the first pitch of the game, though it had taken some convincing to get him to accept the honor. The Chen family was there too, sitting in special seats near the dugout. Young Tommy wore his Red Sox cap proudly, the same one he had refused to give up to Tank. He had started taking junior self-defense classes, but more importantly, he had become known at school as someone who stood up for smaller kids getting bullied. Before the game, Cooper met with a group of young veterans who were dealing with anger management issues. They had reached out after seeing the viral video, wanting to know how he stayed so calm during the confrontation. "The hardest battles are the ones we fight with ourselves," Cooper told them, sharing lessons he had learned the hard way. "Real strength isn't about winning fights. It's about knowing when not to fight and staying in control when you have to." The Road Raiders Motorcycle Club had undergone changes too. After kicking out Tank and his friends, they had started a community outreach program. Every home game now had 2 Road Raiders members volunteering with stadium security, helping to spot and prevent trouble before it started. Tank and his gang had their day in court. The judge, a Vietnam veteran himself, had watched the video carefully. He noted how Cooper had given them multiple chances to walk away, and how they had chosen to escalate instead. "What impresses me most," the judge said during sentencing, "is not how Staff Sergeant Cooper won the fight, but how hard he tried to avoid it. That's a lesson this court hopes you'll learn during your community service. In addition to community service, Tank and his friends were banned from all major sports venues in the state. Snake Tattoo, Mike Peterson, had taken it as a wake-up call. He enrolled in anger management classes and started mentoring troubled teens, sharing his story as a warning about where bullying and trying to look tough can lead. The Army had turned the incident into a training video, showing new recruits the right way to handle civilian confrontations. Notice how Staff Sergeant Cooper maintains his professional bearing throughout, the instructors would point out. He uses only the force necessary to protect civilians and control the situation. Fenway Park made changes too. They improved their security protocols and started a new program training staff how to handle similar situations. They even put up a small plaque in Section 134. In this section, on a summer day in 2024, one soldier showed that true courage means protecting others while keeping your cool. Cooper's sister Rachel kept the newspaper clipping about the incident. The headline read, "Soldier's Calm Courage Turns Baseball Game Bullies into Life Lesson." She had it framed and gave it to Cooper as a birthday present, though he just shook his head and smiled when he saw it. As Cooper stood on the pitcher's mound that evening, preparing to throw out the first pitch, the stadium announcer told his story. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, but Cooper remained humble. He gave a simple wave, threw a perfect strike down the middle, his unit had made him practice, and tried to return to his seat without any fuss. But before he could sit down, Tommy Chen ran up to him with a new baseball to sign. This time, Cooper wrote a longer message. "Remember, true strength is using your power to help others. Never stop standing up for what's right." The story of the soldier at the baseball game became part of Fenway Park legend, told and retold by fans who were there that day. But for Cooper, the most important thing was that he had helped change things for the better, not through violence, but through staying true to his training and values. As the game began, Cooper settled into his seat, finally getting to enjoy a peaceful baseball game. This time, there were no interruptions, just the crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, and the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes doing the right thing can inspire others to change for the better.